As my mom would say, everyone is welcome. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to start with a little music from her dear friend, Bert Seeger. We're going to open with a prayer from Reverend David Kern.
Not exactly a prayer as we think of a prayer. It's a series of petitions, and if you agree with them, say Amen. In peace, let us pray to the Lord. Almighty God, who hast knit together thine elect in one communion and fellowship, in the mystical body of thy Son, Christ our Lord, grant, we beseech thee, to thy whole church in paradise and on earth, thy light and thy peace. Amen. Grant that all who have been baptized, grant to us who are still in our pilgrimage, who walk as yet by faith, yet thy Holy Spirit may lead us in the holiness and righteousness all our days. Amen. Amen. Grant to thy faithful people pardon and peace, that we may be cleansed from all our sins and serve thee with a quiet mind. Amen. Grant us grace to entrust Mary Jane to thy never-failing love. Receive her into the arms of thy mercy, and remember her according to thy favor, which thou bearest unto thy people. Amen. Amen. Grant that increasing in knowledge and love of thee, we may go from strength to strength in the life of perfect service in thy heavenly kingdom. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining in the celebration of the life of Mary Jane Gibson. Mary Jane was born in Commerce, Texas, and moved 9 times by the time she was in high school. I was talking to her about it at one point, and I said, that must have been hard. And she said, it taught me how to make friends. And she made a room full of extraordinary, wonderful friends. So thank you all for being here today, and also thanks for her friends that weren't able to make it today. The irony of all this is she would love to be here and visit with each one of you. That would be her favorite thing to do in the world. I think we, at this point, would like to, if Becky and Mark, in the last couple of years, my mom required a lot of care, and we want to thank some of the caregivers.
Yes, we are just so eternally grateful to these 4 women who cared for Mary Jane the last few years, and that they offered, I'm going to start to cry. Sorry.
Don't make me do it.
They offered extraordinary care all the time, love and support.
I will just say, I used to tell people all the time, we were so lucky because she had the best caretakers who adored her, and she adored them. And you're just not going to get people with that kind of personal care who just loved Mary Jane. And they took care of her, they just fed. We wanted to come over to their house for meals because they were even better than we were, So we were so lucky, and we felt so lucky. So we got them a little something. So Lynn, come on up, Kim.
Thank you guys so much.
In a moment, I'm going to invite other people to share their stories about my mother, but I'm going to tell a couple of stories just to start. And if you guys want to come in, you're welcome to join. You don't have to stand out by the door. When I was in college, we had a friend who every time he'd run into somebody he knew, he would say, oh, we used to be best friends. We grew up together. And it would happen to anybody. You'd run into somebody and they'd say, yeah, I think I remember him. And he'd go, oh, we used to be best friends. We grew up together. And so we would make fun of him for doing that. And there was one time when my mom heard, might have been me, making fun of him for that. And afterwards she said, that's just his way of saying how much he liked those people and how fond he was of them. And it's such a Mary Jane thing to do, to think about the best in people. She always would say, people do the best that they can. Now, it didn't stop me from making fun of him, but it was the right thought. When I was in law school, I lived at home, and a number of my law school classmates were from out of state. And so I invited them over to have dinner, and I did something elegant like spaghetti. And they came over, and the next day, I ran into one of them, a young black woman who said, I was really nervous coming to your house, but your mom just made me feel so welcome and at home. And I think she had the ability to make people feel welcome and at home. For a long time, I thought it was because she grew up in the South, and I think that's still a part of it. But my current theory is that it more has to do with her being a Hitchcock. And her sisters are here. I don't know where they are now. Sarah and Helen, they are just extraordinary people. They make you feel wonderful just talking to them. They came from Little Rock in St. Louis. Their daughters came from Little Rock, Dallas, and Chicago today. They're extraordinary people, and I think that some of this is a Hitchcock gene thing. Okay, I could go on, but I think we're going to turn this over and let some other people. Anyone who would like to is welcome to come up, and Senator Mike Barrett is here. First became friends with Mom when they were freshmen together in the Massachusetts legislature. I will tell you that when Mike was in the legislature with my mother, I'd hear stories of how smart and capable Mike was. And then Mike got married and had kids, and I'd hear stories of what a great parent Mike was. Mike and Nancy were. And about a month ago, I got an email, a fundraising email from Mike's daughter, trying to raise money for Mike's reelection campaign, and I had to give, after all that. So, Mike, please.
Well, thank goodness my daughter stuck to the script. Nathan and Mark and Rachel and Becky, the Gibsons and the Hitchcocks, thank you for bringing us all together. This really is the kind of happy occasion that reminds you of Mary Jane. In January 1979, this was following the 1978 election, Mary Jane and I were sworn into our seats in the Massachusetts House of Representatives for the first time. And in those days, it won't surprise you to hear that both the House and the Senate had bad reputations as bodies resistant to the reform impulse represented by then Governor Mike Dukakis. So as the new state rep from Belmont, Mary Jane immediately joined a very small but hardy band of reformers led by Democrats like Phil Johnston, who's with us today with his wife Beverly, and Barney Frank. I joined the same group. Mary Jane and I had never met prior to that, but we had a pre-existing connection because 10 years earlier in the financial aid office at Harvard College, her husband Jerry had assembled a scholarship, loan, and work-study package to help one of 10 kids from modest family circumstances. So a decade on, in 1979, when Mary Jane and I were sworn in, I saw Jerry again. He remembered me, which was very nice, and I remembered him with gratitude. So Mary Jane and I had a foundation on which to build. To me and to new state reps like, and I'm just thinking of names, Larry Alexander of Marblehead and David Cohen of Newton, Bill Benson of Greenfield, Mary Jane really stood out. She was different than us. Of course, she was a woman, and she was a little older, and she was married, settled, had kids. She spoke with a hint of a drawl for reasons that all of us understand, and she really could charm a bird right out of a tree. You couldn't help but enjoy her company. She made being a reformer fun, and let me tell you, that is hard to do. She was warm, she was enthusiastic. She reminded me of Phil and Barney because she really was a natural politician in the sense that she truly liked people. And she thought the weird aspects of our business were a hoot. So to the other newbies like me, she was very free with encouragement. And that is not easy to do when you're in a competitive environment, as we were. You can't kind of summon that kindness up on the spur of the moment unless it's really true to you. And it was true to her. She really had a strong sense of self, but she also had that impulse toward generosity for which I was always grateful for as long as she lived and I knew her. But she had a lot more going on than just a magnetic personality. You can't talk about Mary Jane without mentioning her moral compass. When she described herself, she would always mention her Texas roots and her Methodist upbringing, which took a Catholic boy like me back a step for a moment. She knew human beings were highly imperfect, subject to all kinds of temptations, not the least of which was ambition. But as a good Methodist, she also knew that salvation is available to everyone. And as Nathan mentioned, she never forgot that, and it radiated from her at tense moments, because this included her adversaries, and our adversaries, I should say. She once counseled me on how to approach other politicians who were not buying into our vision for change, which we knew was correct. This was a surprisingly large group. And here's what Mary Jane said. She said, you don't tear into them. You don't deliver a lecture. You remember that people can always surprise you on the upside. So you challenge them to be the best possible versions of themselves. That is so Mary Jane. She gave me that advice a long time ago. I still think of it all the time. I can never manage to follow it, but I think about it all the time. She really thought you were capable of great things if she knew you, but she also expected you to come through and prove it once in a while. So she really brought a lot to the table. Southern charm and that Texas geniality, married to a New England conscience. It really mattered in 1984. We good government types that year pulled off something that hadn't been done before then in modern Massachusetts politics and hasn't been done since. We, urged on by activists and the Globe, we ran a bona fide reformer, George Kavarian, for Speaker of the Massachusetts House, and we defeated the old-time Democratic incumbent. The good guys won. And when it came time for George to put together his leadership team, who did he name as Assistant Majority Whip, the fourth most powerful person in the Massachusetts House of Representatives, but Mary Jane? There had been a showdown between two factions in the party. Nerves were frayed. George needed somebody who could soothe feelings and get us together again. And Mary Jane, as you might imagine, was a very smart choice. She had this nice, light touch. She was shrewd, too. She could combine all the strong personalities in the House, and there were 160 of them, about 130 of them Democrats, and make it all into a legislative sausage. After she left office, Mary Jane and I stayed in touch. She moved full-time to Eastham. She got involved in things down here, but she also got involved in politics around the country. She went down to Texas, of course, back to her native state to register voters. Maybe Phil Johnston, who was active in persuading her to do that, can tell us a little bit about those days. She kept up her membership on the board of directors of the Ella Lyman Cabot Trust, a charity that gives grants to individuals who want to take a turn in their lives towards creative and idealistic work, and we're very, very pleased to have members of the trust here with us today. By then, she had changed. She had evolved, as we all tend to do. She had dialed down the dead mother persona and dialed up the plain speaking. She loved delivering over grant applications with other members of the trust. She really deeply enjoyed that group. And I can testify they're an impressive bunch. She was a strong advocate and loved the give and take, and at her urging, I took her place on the board when commuting from the Cape became hard for her. So I owe her a lot. One final example, it was 1980, our first term, and we were at a party at somebody's house to celebrate the passage of several bills drafted by the Ward Commission, an investigatory body set up reluctantly by the Massachusetts House to address some serious corruption problems. Phil Johnston had pulled together a small group of us, insurgent reps and senators, to move out front in support of the reforms. Anyway, I found myself at a very awkward turn at this party. There was a pretty young woman who worked for the commission. She had briefed me on the bills that we were pushing, which were complicated, so that I could help out in floor debate. And this young person was very conscientious. She kept making appointments with me again and again to make sure I understood the details. And I appreciated that, but I'm bad with names, which is a tough thing for a politician to have to admit. And I could not remember hers. So we were at this party, and she kept looking my way, and I could not go over there until I knew who she was. So I searched out Mary Jane, and I whispered, that young woman, who works for the commission, she's here. What is her name? Mary Jane knew it, of course. She told me, and I then walked over and said, Nancy, congratulations, you did a terrific job. So that was 1980. Within a year, we were married. We still are. Mary Jane, you always came through. Thank you.
And who introduced you? Me, yeah. I'm Phil Johnston. Yeah, well, Nancy's thanking me. She worked for the Ward Commission, as Mike pointed out. And Mike and I, by the way, are related. by marriage. And yeah, yeah. So that's the way we do things in the State House. Now, you know, I was when Beverly and I were driving down here this morning, I was thinking about the comparison between Mary Jane, who was the grandmotherly, you know, as Mike described her, soft-spoken, wonderful human being that she was. And I will always thank George Kavarian, even though he's not with us anymore, for having appointed the least likely whip in the legislature, because that's what her job was to whip people in the legislature. You can imagine that she wasn't all that, you know, she wasn't really a threatening personality. Unlike her predecessor, and her predecessor was a guy who had notoriously been arrested. And he, unfortunately for him, he was at the Parker House in Boston one night, and he accepted a bribe of $85,000 in cash. Sounds like Mary Jane, right? And then a little later that morning, when he got to the State House, he got a call from one of Whitey Bulger's guys. And Whitey Bulger's guy said, you know the guys that gave you that $85,000 last night? And he said, this guy, how did you know that? And he said, they were FBI agents. So you know what he did? He called the guys who had given him the $85,000, and he said, you know, I've been thinking. And I've been thinking about my mother. And my mother always told me to tell the truth and don't do anything wrong. So I want to give you the $85,000 back. And do you know he was acquitted? He went to court, he was acquitted. Anyway, sounds like Mary Jane, right? I'll just do two quick stories. One is, as Mike pointed out, when she called me after Jerry died, and we were very, very close. And she said, you know what I want to do now? And she was like 83, I think, at the time. She said, I want to take one of my girlfriends, who's my age, and I want to go to Texas, and I want to register Mexicans who are citizens and can vote as Democratic voters in Texas. And she said, I think that could have a big impact on outcomes, you know, Beto O'Rourke and other Democrats who were running at the time. So she said, do you have any ideas about where we could go? And she said, my friend who's going to be accompanying me is used to very, you know, sort of A-plus motels, or not motels, but hotels. And so I called a close friend of mine who runs a federally qualified community health center right in the border. And unfortunately, and you know, those of you who know what happened in Uvalde, that's where it was. It was in Uvalde, Texas. And I called the director, who was my friend, and I said, I have these two friends who are in their 80s and they want to get down, and they're really committed Democrats, and they want change in states like Texas, and they're very serious about it. And so would you be willing to host them at the community health center? So she said, yeah, absolutely. So the two of them went down there. They spent, I think, 6 weeks, day in and day out, 24/7 almost. But we couldn't find, in Uvalde, we could not find an A-plus hotel for them. So Motel 8 it was. But they literally signed up hundreds of voters who had not been registered before. And yeah, I think it made a difference. I think it made a difference. The other story I'll tell you, just last one, is that when I was a boy, which is a long time ago, my family used to vacation here, not here, but in Eastham. And I kind of fell in love with Eastham. And what's there not to fall in love with in Eastham, right? Or Wellfleet. This whole part of the Cape is wonderful. Plus, it's about 99% Democratic. So that's why another reason why Mary Jane was very comfortable here, as was I. So she called me up one day and said, I know you love Eastham. And we were in Marshfield. We have a house in Marshfield, which is where my district was when I was in the house with Mike. And she said, Jerry and I'd love to entertain you and Beverly for dinner. So we came up here, and we were down here, whatever it is, and she said, look out that, she lived in the Cove. For those of you who are from around here, you know what a fabulous view that is. That's one of the great views on the East Coast. And I was just struck dumb. And I said, that's the most beautiful view I've ever seen. And Marshfield's right on the ocean. We have good views there too, but nothing like this. So I just thought about it. And a few weeks later, she called me and she said, you know, there's a house for sale 2 doors down from where Jerry and I are. And I mentioned it to Beverly, and she said, no, absolutely no way. and she said, no, we don't want to add that at our ages. We don't want to add, this is 20 years ago, by the way. At our ages, we don't want to add to our debt and all of that and the burden. So I said, well, look, let's at least, just to be nice to Mary Jane, why don't we go and take a look at the place with Mary Jane and Jerry? So we did. We came down here. And Beverly's saying all the while, she said, no, don't commit to anything, don't commit to anything. And all of a sudden, a red-winged blackbird flew by Beverly and me, and immediately I felt her soften. And you know, now we own that house, and we've owned that house for 20 years. We lived so close to the Gibsons for all of those years, and we became even closer friends during those years and appreciated her even more than I had when we served together in the legislature. And whenever I see a red-winged blackbird in our yard, I think of Mary Jane. I always will. Thank you.
I'm just going to add a little bit to Phil's story. My mom went to Uvalde with Delno Perkins, who is a lifelong friend, became friends with my mom before my mom had kids. And Delno wanted to be here but couldn't be here today. But Perkins had been lifelong friends with ours, and he did go there. Is Jeff Swope here? Jeff, when she went to Uvalde, Jeff set her up to do a blog and chronicle her trip to Uvalde. And I've been reading that again, so thank you, Jeff, for doing that. And I'm going through a lot of her stuff and finding things about people in this room that are just wonderful. But one of the things that she would say was, everybody should have a friend like the Johnstons. So thank you very much.
A lot of what I wanted to say has been said. So that keeps my talk a little short, which is good because I'm sure there are others of you who want to turn up here. What forms us? What creates us? We start as little children. We're innocent. We're in everybody else's arms. We're pushed from here to there. But what makes us become what we are? Well, I looked into this a little bit with Mary Jane because I didn't know. And what I kept hearing was about 3 uncles. The 3 uncles who just loved Mary Jane the way most of us love her, only more. And they thought she was the cat's meow. Is that an expression still around? And they treated her like a queen. Now that can be deadly for a little girl, because they begin to think they're queens. Mary Jane grew up with this reinforced self from these three uncles. And that's what every child needs, reinforcement, very basic stuff that keeps you not only alive, but keeps you knowing who you are and what you want to be. So when I start to look into Mary Jane's life, these three uncles stood out. But I said to myself, it could not have been just the uncles, because the uncles probably spoiled her. But she wasn't spoiled. How do we account for that? Well, I account for it by looking how close that whole family was, and especially Mary Jane, to the church. She and her family were loyal members of the Methodist Church. In every sense, she went to church, but she lived the church. And she lived the church in such a way that people didn't think of her as living the church. They thought of her as a human being who cared about other people. That was her hallmark. Mary Jane did not get spoiled because of the church, I think. Everybody needs something to balance their life, and that's what balanced hers. Her family was there, of course, and she did a splendid job at college, and that had an impact. But those two things, her uncles and the Methodist Church, I say that as an Episcopalian, just was absolutely perfect. Sometimes I think I should have been a Methodist. I just want to say a few things that, from a different point of view, sound familiar, but they're things that stand out in my mind as being very important from our interest in her. Mary Jane just knew how to get into people, how to get onto people, get involved with people, and maybe the most important thing, how to stay with people. It was never a fly-by-night situation where she would be, how are you, nice to see you, goodbye. No, that was not Mary Jane. Mary Jane was one of those people who, once she knew you, she was yours. And you became one of hers. And I look at this crowd here as a representative group, and I can see this is a Mary Jane crowd. Right? Yes. So, the first thing is that, that's very personal. My wife went to the book club with Mary Jane. Peggy's here somewhere. And they got to talking as they always did. And Mary Jane was interested by asking questions, drawing Peggy out. And Peggy told her about our daughter, who happened to be a quadriplegic and was very much into adaptive ways of helping people with their disabilities. She was just a young kid, but she was really there. So Mary Jane wanted to know all about our daughter. So Peggy told her about this program that Jenny started of gathering people and money and going over to Africa and setting up something for the people of Africa because they were asking for it. And what they wanted someone to help them get started with some kind of adaptive bicycling. Now that was becoming old-fashioned here. But in Africa, they had never heard of it. So they asked her, Jenny, to get involved, and Jenny said she would. So this is all what Peggy was telling Mary Jane. So the upshot of it was that Mary Jane took an interest, and that always meant follow-up. And in this case, somebody else mentioned the Cabot Lodge, the Cabot Trust. Mary Jane was sort of not as active as she was at that point, but she was still very interested. And so she said to our daughter, I will see what I can find out. So she put herself to work and got herself a grant for Jennifer, a grant that would cover transportation for Jenny and her group to Nambia, cover bicycles, cover transportation, cover whatever she needed to get started over there. And we thank the Cabot. I understand who's from Cabot? We thank you again and again. So they get started, and if you want a nice vacation, go to Nambia, which is just above South Africa, and spend some time watching these people ride their bicycles. They're all disabled. They get around, but they also have a sense of life they didn't have before. And that was so important to Jenny because she had gone through the same thing, and she came out whole. And she didn't care about her disability. She cared about working with other people. And that was directly related to Mary Jane. And that's the theme of my talk today. Mary Jane had a way of getting people involved and staying involved and keeping involved. The second point I wanted to make, and it's already been made very well, Mary Jane loved politics. I confess, I'm a lifelong Democrat from New York. I love East Ham. We have a lot of Democrats. And Mary Jane loved East Ham. And I was always wondering what made her such a good Democrat. And I'm going to invent a few things that I have in my mind. One, her life didn't quite parallel, but was quite close enough to, and she must have known about the work of LBJ. Because he was so prominent in Texas, she was in Texas, he was doing some of the things she wanted to do. And so I think of him as an influence on her. We always think of LBJ as rah, rah, rah. But he was more than that. He was a very good man who did a lot of good for a lot of people. And then there was even more important people, higher above. There was Eleanor and Franklin. Now these two people, I'm sure, had a profound effect on her because she acted like them. She didn't have the bankroll, but she had the Cabots. But she must have been influenced by people like that because all of that dedicated Republican goodwill, make things better for everybody, was in her. And you couldn't be with her very long before it came out. And you felt it, and you knew it. And I always loved that because I've always loved LBJ and FDR and the Democratic Party because it saved my life when I was a kid in New York. And I really loved hearing her talk about it and knowing it meant as much to her as it did to me. So that formed a bond between us. I never said this to her, but she's hearing it now. Her motto was to serve and to help. That's what she was about. It was never about her. But for us who knew her, who were close to her was what it was about. Right? Now, somebody mentioned the trip to Texas. I want to approach it from a slightly different angle. I never saw Mary Jane so girlish, happy, looking forward to something as to that trip to Texas. One of the reasons was her very good friend of long standing was Delano Perkins, who happened to be the wife of a roommate of mine in seminary. Because the beat goes on and on and on. But I hadn't seen Delano in years, and after she got back from Texas, she got us together for a lunch and sort of renewed that acquaintance. I was hoping to see her today, but it's a long trip. But she was very instrumental in getting Mary Jane to go down to Texas. And when they were down there, they had a ball. Because Mary Jane was a fun-loving person. With all the seriousness, she loved a good time. And she went down there with this girlish attitude that she was going to register all these people. And the strange thing about it, she did. They registered hundreds of people who, for the first time, were going to vote. So we always thought of her as the vote catcher. I think that's enough of that. What did Mary Jane come to? That little kid starting out who became, what did she become? Some of the things she became was bright, well-educated, thanks to her parents, outgoing and loving, sensitive, very conscious of others' needs, pleased to share. That's how I think of Mary Jane. I just wish she could be here today. She would love this. So I will conclude and let somebody else have the mic. But before I do, I want to thank Nathan, Mark, Rebecca, and Rachel. I thank them for all of you for bringing us together, being so gracious about their invitation, and helping me to stand up. They have been wonderful in terms of getting us together. And they were just like Mary Jane was. All about us, not about them. So we thank you, family, and pray all good things for you. Now, this is an unusual way to close the talk, and I hope I can do it. And if you know this tune, I hope you'll join in. That's not gin. All praise and thanks to thee ascend, forevermore, blessed one in three, and grant us life that shall not end in our true native land with thee. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Mary Jane.
Hi, I'm Eloise McGaw Bridger, Bob. I'll be very brief. I'll try. I just wanted to tell you something I don't even think the kids know about Mary Jane and Jerry, and that is in 1976, when we moved to Belmont, we knew no one, and my godparents, Rita and Jim O'Leary, said, they lived in Connecticut, you must look up Jerry and Mary Jane Gibson. They will be great mentors to you as you settle into Belmont. And so we met Mary Jane at our neighbor's house when she was running for school committee. And she's been a mentor and a mother and just a great friend to our family throughout this time. And there's so many things I could tell you, but it's not about the politics. It was about the friendship and the love that she showed and her family has shown to my kids and to me and Bob. We got introduced to Eastham through them. We bought a house about a mile away from them about 20 years ago. Jerry and Mary Jane helped us find it, and following in good stead. And I just wanted us to hear Mary Jane's voice for a second. And this is very strange, but I was, as many of us do, throwing away things as we get older. And I found a letter from Mary Jane to Bob and me, and it's not dated, but I believe it was after a Mother's Day when I had dropped some flowers off because my mother had died and I had Mary Jane. But I'll just read some excerpts from it. Dear Bob and Eloise, when the saints go marching in, you two will be out in front. I'll be following you, hoping to make the cut. And then she thanks us for the flowers and all, but at the end she says, I love hearing about your gifted children, whom she has supported throughout their whole journeys. My daughter's not here, but she is sending her love. She says, I love hearing about your gifted children and where the two of you are in your journey. Life is appallingly short, except on some afternoons that are 3 months long. And one understands so little the first 50 years. But the rewards that make up for everything are the times with old friends. A 6-year-old we know, responding to his mom's suggestion of a play date with me, said, quote, she's nice and I like her, but we're not on the same coordinates. Mary Jane writes, if I know what that means, I'd say we four are on the same coordinates. Thank God, love, and thanks.
So just to bring it back to politics for a second, I would be remiss if I didn't say that I was the 10-year-old in a photo up there with Governor Dukakis sitting on his knee with Mary Jane, but also that's the beginning of the journey of politics, of participating in town meeting and all the things I've done. But every time I came home from Washington and the latest campaign, I was interrogated by Mary Jane here in Eastham, where it was safe on all sides among all of you Democrats. And she picked apart every campaign story from the Clinton era, from the Obama campaign, Hillary's campaign, Kerry's campaign. I don't know if that was a campaign. She interrogated me on every single side and encouraged me to get back into the fray each time we lost. And when we won, she encouraged us to get back in the fray because the work was never done. So I'm in public service in part because of this amazing woman and her family who always made a home here for us every year. So I'm going to miss her.
I'm Bob McGaw, the third of the trifecta here. Mary Jane was a light in my life, and for 47 years I had a love affair with her. Every time I was with her, it was like a butterfly landing on your shoulder. It was rare. You felt better about yourself. She made you feel good, and she made you feel like you wanted to go out and work again to keep doing what you were doing. And if I could burst your balloons, she always told me I was the smartest and the best. And I suspect many of you have heard the same thing. And she kept track of every one of you and all of your relationships and places you've been, and she knew it all. And if I said anything to her, like Wisconsin, it would be, oh yeah, I know Bill Fred. They used to come down to the campground. His daughter is now in San Diego doing artwork. And every time I had a new job, she would say, oh, you got to go meet so-and-so. He's a really, really smart lawyer, the smartest lawyer I know, except for you, Bob. And when I went to Palmer and Dodge, and I can't remember the name, but if Mary Jane was here, she would tell me. She said, you got to go talk to so-and-so. He's the smartest lawyer. He works on this trust, and he may be here today. Over there? Yes. So eventually I ran into you, and we clicked, and yes, she had told you you were the best and the smartest also. Mary Jane is making a lot of connections as we speak. And as each of us go to heaven, she's going to introduce you to everyone up there. And she will tell you that you are the best. So
I really wasn't planning on saying anything, but the Cabot Trust keeps coming up. And Mary Jane and I served on the Cabot Trust for many years. She was our executive secretary, an unpaid volunteer job, but she really went out and sought people to support. And we have very unusual rules, which are that we have no rules, but we give grants to people with projects. And one year, long, long ago, we got an application from a woman in a tribe in, I think it was Arizona, a Native American woman who wanted to do some project. And Mary Jane thought this was terrific. She got all the application materials together for this woman, and we voted her a grant. And I always thought it had something to do with this woman's name, which was Irma Mankiller. So years later, Chief Mankiller, because she had by that time been elected chief of this indigenous peoples group, came to Massachusetts to see Mary Jane. And so Mary Jane invited the then trustees to come down to the State House and meet her. And we did, and Mary Jane had quite nice offices there as whip, and we met her and all the rest. And then as we were leaving, she was wending our way through kind of back hallways, and we thought, I wonder where. We come out of a door behind the speaker's rostrum. The legislature's in session. Everything comes to a halt. She goes to the microphone. The speaker steps aside. She introduces us to the legislature, who all stand and applaud us. Completely unexpected, but that was Mary Jane.
To say something about the cabins. That was the other piece of her life, after all. I got started, my husband and I and our 3 kids, thanks to Noel Tipton, who is here today, who said that's the only place to go, and you've got to do that. So we came in 1975. We managed to get 2 weeks in August, of all things. I call those our soul restoring time. She was, I don't know, I've never stayed in other people's cabins, so I don't know how it is. But we all knew each other. Everybody there was immediately part of the family, and the good vibes that spread over that beach, and the way we interacted. We made movies together. We had cocktail hours, spontaneous cocktail hours, and of course John Schiff's clam dinners. It it was warm and welcoming and soul restoring. One summer we couldn't make it because of death in our family, and I felt all winter long, I felt the loss of those 2 weeks, but happily they saved them for us and we don't have it. Then after about 20 years, in 96, I guess, my husband retired, and we thought, where do we want to live? We don't want to live in a big empty house in New Jersey anymore. The kids are all gone. So we came up here to look at the cave in the winter time, one snowy weekend in February. And of course, Mary Jane had a party for us. And we met a whole lot of people at her home. And she introduced us to a real estate man who said, I could show you a house on Monday that's just a mile down the road. And we went and we looked at it. And of course, we fell in love with it immediately. Went back to Mary Jane's house. And I remember sitting in her living room and saying, oh my God, we can't buy a house just by seeing it once at 8 o'clock in the morning. This is crazy. Real people don't do that. And at one point I said, well, we have to call the children and see how they feel about it. And Mary Jane said, no, you don't. They've all flown the coop. You are big grown-up people. You can make this decision on your own. And so we did. We put an offer in at noon. They accepted it at 7 o'clock that night, and we've lived here ever since. And she is, I know it was part of her special warmth that made those cabins so very, very special. Thank you.
Dad married her parents when he was a minister, and we've known Christine since she was so high.
I was born. So I am Christine, and earlier this afternoon I was happily mistaken for Rachel or Becky. I'm not sure which. And that was really, Amy and I were mistaken for you all, and we said, no, we're not the daughters, and then we looked at each other, Amy and I, and thought, well, yeah, we're going to claim that. So my brother, younger brother, decided to leave the planet in 2018, in the fall, and it was unexpected and a surprise to all of us. And after his service and time, my mother and I were talking, and I had a break from school, and I was trying to decide where to go, and Mother said, go to the Cape. And I thought, okay. At James's, my brother's, memorial time with his friends at work, where he really was planted the deepest, I shared one of Mary Oliver's poems about the summer day, because James lived one wild and crazy and precious life. And so Mother and I talked about me coming to Cape Cod. We made a plan. I called a friend, and we got in the car and came on. And when I saw Mary Jane in the cottage where she lived, there was a book of poems from Mary Oliver on the coffee table. And I thought, oh, that's right. Of course, that's right. If I was like searching and looking for reasons for why I was supposed to be there at that time, like you said, right, that the cottages are a place where you come to find yourself. And after that loss of James, I had to find myself again. A little later that fall, right after Thanksgiving, my mom decided to leave the planet. And what was so amazing about my mother and Dad's connection with the Gibsons was that when she was in college, she was sickly, and she lived on the 3rd floor of the Gibson house. And I believe that Mary Jane taught my mother how to be a mom, and also that Nate and Becky and Mark and Rachel were her first children because they were so young. And so when she and my dad adopted my brother and me, she knew a little bit about what she was doing because she'd practiced with you guys, who I think, right, are kind of like my big brothers and sisters. So when I think about Mary Oliver and what she said, her rules for living, right, are about, I knew I would forget them exactly, so I wrote them down. She says, pay attention and be astonished and tell about it. And for me, that captures Mary Jane, right? Pay attention. Mary Jane, I think, would also add, when you are paying attention and something shocks you, then you need to do something about it. And she did, always. You see it in the pictures, right? I mean, from the early State House times to her Black Lives Matter t-shirt, right? All through her life, you see it. When something wasn't right, she did something about it. She not only noticed things and was astonished by them, she did tell about them. I was able to come several more years in a row since my mom died at fall break to put myself together, to find myself again, to have a little moment in the pond. But Mary Jane had a deep understanding of working for the common good, and we've heard about it today here, seeing ourselves, but she saw us. Not only as a collective group, I think of the Democrats maybe in Eastham who she saw, and folks on these committees that she worked on that were very important, right? But she saw each of us individually who we were, and then she calls you to your better self. Every single time you have an interaction, whether it's a dinner party or I get, this sort of thing, or you're sitting in the cottage with her and she's telling you a story about someone and reminding you who you are supposed to be, where your roots are, how people have poured into each of us, and how she did that over and over and over and over throughout our lives. I started coming to the Cape when I was 3 or 4, and now again at 53 have been coming back again for these number of years. It also makes me laugh, and I think that she would be overjoyed when we think about 6 degrees of separation. And I love it when I play the 6 degrees game, right, in my mind. You know the game I'm talking about, like how far are you from whoever in the world? And I think Mary Jane brings me closer to 6 degrees, right? So from Mary Jane, you get to a governor. From the governor, you get to a president. From the president, you get to any world leader pretty quickly, right? So because of Mary Jane, the world is truly smaller. The degrees of separation are fewer because of her place in the world and her place in our lives. She is, for me, and I think for many of you, like an auntie, right? There's your grandma, and she's still as bossy and elderly. Not elderly, but eldering, right? That's what my parents said when someone who's older wants to shame you or boss you, they call it eldering, right? It's time to elder you. Mary Jane didn't do that. She was like that auntie who slips you a 20 on your way out of the house, right? And she contributes to whatever organization you care about, and she funds your students' or your teachers' Donors Choose project. She sends you sweet and wonderful notes in the mail because that's just who she is. She was this perpetual auntie, at least for me, and I think maybe for many of us. Heaven is a richer place because she's there. And that reminds me in a very profound way that I feel sort of in the center of me, that my job and responsibility now is to be Mary Jane's hands and feet here while I'm still here. Right? What does that mean for me? How do I connect to the common good? How do I live out my United Methodist faith? How do I live out what people have poured into me? How do I live that legacy and extend that privilege? Because she did that for all of us. So if you are wondering what you're supposed to be doing, think about what Mary Jane would tell you or ask you in that way that she had, to call you to your better self and to continue to work for the common good.
It was 1982. I had just given birth to our second child. I had just turned 30. I felt fat, tired, exhausted, and we also had an 11-year-old. And somehow we were on Depot Pond, and we looked over and saw these red cabins, and we were like, what is that? We took the strollers, but back time they were really huge, and we walked half a mile to get there onto the porch of the old house, and Mary Jane came out, and I said, is there any possibility that we can rent here? And she looked at me and she said, Judy, you were meant to be here. You know? She had known me all of a minute and a half, but that did not matter. 40 years later, we are still at the cabin for the month of July. I look out in this room, and I know more than half the people here because we have become a Gibson family, cottage family, and we all know each other. And we always have wonderful stories. And everyone has become my family. Mark, Nathan, Becky, Rachel. Mary Jane was always there for my family. She would say to me, Judy, you're great, but one day you might be as good as your husband. You know? When Adam had his first heartbreak, and we were not here then, who did he go to? He went to Mary Jane, and she took care of him. She loved us, and she loves my boys like her own, and we have become one huge, just very special. They're very special to us and always will be. When we moved to Nashville and we would travel from Nashville to the Cape every summer, they would give us a portion of their basement so we could keep our things there. Mary Jane encouraged me in everything that I did. She encourages my boys. When we finally moved here, I mean, it was inevitable, full time. Jerry made sure I was on the Eastham Forum. Mary Jane made sure I met the right people and did the right things that would help. And she was just, you know, I just cannot say enough about her. She mentored me, she loved all of us. She brought out the best in every single one of us, and every single way that she knew you. She tried to get me involved more in politics. That didn't work, you know. But through her, we are all connected. Through her, we all know the love of what she has given us. And I am grateful for that every day. Thank you.
She loved Judy and Walter, but she really loved their boys.
Okay, I'm going to share 3 quick stories which, for me, represent Mary Jane. I thought Mary Jane was fun. I thought she was generous, and she was tough. When I was 24, I got a Trans Am, a black Trans Am. It was a new style. It was like the first year of the non-Burt Reynolds Trans Am. It was sleek, 8-cylinder, loud, black. And so I'm driving to the Cape one Friday with Mary Jane. I pull into a rest stop, and I said, Mary Jane, I want you to drive. She's like, no. I'm like, Mary Jane, I want you to drive. She's like, okay. So we get out there. We're driving kind of slow in the right lane. She's got the seat pulled up, and I'm like, you're doing great. And this car kind of goes whipping by us, and she looks at me, she goes, that car shouldn't be passing us, should it? And I'm like, it should not. And she's like, I love that. She just, my favorite story. The second one is she's generous, which we all know. All these stories are related to her same qualities. A few years ago, I'm in my house, she's living next to me, and the UPS guy, the dogs are barking, I see a UPS guy go up to her cottage. I'm like, yeah, no big deal. Go back to work, and 5 minutes later, the UPS truck is still out there. I'm like, I better go check on this, right? And so I go over, I start walking up the ramp, and the UPS guy comes out, and he's like, is that your mom? I was like, yeah. He's like, she is so nice. She just gave me a sandwich, a Diet Coke. She gave me a doggy bag for later. I'm like, and I said, Mary Jane, a strange guy in the cottage. But she didn't look at that. She didn't look at it as a stranger. She looked at it as somebody to be nice to. And the last one is at the end. It's actually funny. I don't know if I'm crying. She was accepted into hospice. But 4 days earlier, we tried to get her into hospice, and they came, and she was pretty much bedridden, a lot of just 1 and 2 word answers, and not talking too much. And we called hospice, and so we brought the woman into the bedroom, and Mary Jane just lit up. It was like, welcome! Welcome, it's so nice to see you. Your hair's so great. Can I get you something? She I was like, hey, it's not even talking. So the woman comes out, and she calls the supervisor and says, and they decide not to, they thought maybe she could get a little better, and the woman was like, and she is still talking a lot. That is Mary Jane. She had the gift of the gab. But anyway, she was tough, and from that point on, we got her to hospice, and she went 9 days. She went 10 days without food and just a sip of water every day. And so we talked to the hospice person, and we said to her, "How long can she last?" And she's like, "Well, the record that I'm aware of is 9 days. I don't know." So it makes sense to me that she lasted 12 days. She was tough. She had her family around her. Corey came from halfway around the world to see her. Those are my stories.
At my mother's events growing up, she would always embarrass the 4 kids. And so I'm going to take a little page from that. And I found a letter that she had written, that I was going to read just part of. Mark is a superb caretaker. He thinks of everything before I need it. He calls the doctor for me. He handles the mail. He's fun and well-informed. My girls give me everything I need before I need it myself. I am so lucky. So I would like to say thanks to Mark and to Becky and to Rachel for taking such good care of my mom. Thanks to Rachel for organizing this event. Mark, for the last 15 years, has lived next door to my parents and really has done an extraordinary job as my dad aged and certainly as my mom aged. And in the last 2 years, Becky has just been exceptional in coming out and spending a lot of time with my mom. So you cannot overstate that. All right. I am also having the pleasure of going through some of my mother's stuff, since she passed, and I came across these paradoxical commandments, and they just remind me of my mom a lot. The one I like most is, give the world the best you have and you'll get kicked in the teeth. Give the world the best you have anyway. Thank you all for coming today. Appreciate your friendship to our family. You guys have been great friends to my mom and to all of us, and thank you so much.